Gentlemen, I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Council of the Town of Oakville. And Madam Clerk, I see we have no regrets this evening. And I guess we should always ask if there are declarations of pecuniary interest, which we'll do, and then we'll do O Canada. Any declarations? Don't see any. Now, I'd like to invite everybody to rise and join Council in the singing of O Canada.
I know, just relax.
Thank you, everyone. Please be seated. Council, I'd ask you to turn your attention to the minutes of the previous council meetings as listed in the agenda, the 2 public meetings and the confidential minutes. Councillor Duddick is moving approval. Councillor Adams is seconded. All in favor? The minutes are approved. Council, we now have the great pleasure of hearing from Metrolinx and their, I think, fairly astonishing plans to help us keep moving over the next 25 years. I don't know whether to, I don't have a name for whoever's coming from Metrolinx. So you're, I guess the gentle way to say it is, you're up. Well, Peter, if you'll cooperate with our microphone by speaking toward it, the people at home will be able to hear you.
My name is Peter Zook, and I am the newly minted Chief Capital Officer at Metrolinx. I grew up in the town of Danvers, Massachusetts, in the States, best known as the home of the original witchcraft hysteria of 1692. But in my time there, I was a member of my local council for 18 years, so I am always anxious to come out and to spread the word about what we are doing at Metrolinx and talk with the folks who are our partners and helping to make it happen. In fact, the people we're working for. Do you know which this, let's see if I can, there we go.
So this is actually the mouse. So
The mouse?
Yeah, correct. So the best thing that you can probably do
Okay.
is, we don't have the pointer right now, so you can just hit next.
Great.
Slide like that, okay?
Very good.
Let me just do one quick thing so I can get this thing used.
And so I'm going to hit this, huh?
The right arrow key.
Oh, very good. I don't need to tell you anything about what the challenge is here in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton region, and it is the cost of being stuck in traffic. And you here in Oakville are right in the center of it. And with your growth, you have a real need for the improvements we're trying to bring from Metrolinx. So at Metrolinx, as you all know, a very big part of our mission is planning. We're now working on the second regional plan. You will hear about that in a few minutes from my colleague Leslie. But we're also building, operating, and connecting people within the region. My principal role is in the building side of the business, so I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we are planning for the next few years. First of all, it's a very aggressive and ambitious plan. We have a $19.5 billion in assets which are Metrolinx today. But over the next 10 years, our planned capital program will add to that base $43 billion in investment here in the province. So really, when we're done with it, we will have $65 billion or so of infrastructure devoted to supporting transportation. As you know, the promise of RER, Regional Express Rail, is to take what is now morning and evening service and turn it into 15-minute service every day. The result of that being, when we are complete, that over 80% of residents in the region will be within 2 kilometers of a rapid transit place where they can go and be connected to the system and connected to someplace else in the region. It's no small job. This slide describes in the middle 6,000 trips per week, a 300% increase, as well as on the left, the infrastructure requirements, what we're adding to the system, describes the time savings for folks, as well as on the right-hand side, some of the extensions which we're planning. $13.5 billion is committed in provincial and federal funding. And as I said, when we're done, we'll have invested another $43 billion in the system. That infrastructure, 150 kilometers of new dedicated GO tracks, electrified service, we're taking our current diesel service and making it electrified. The bridges and tunnels that are necessary to support that, and where we can, separating railway traffic from vehicle traffic. New and improved stations to make your journey more comfortable from start to finish. And as I said, the electrified infrastructure. As I described a bit earlier, really this will be taking something that is morning and evening service and making it all-day service, adding stations to the system that will accommodate that. Here are a few of the things we're working on directly here in Oakville. There are planned improvements to the Bronte GO station, parking and access improvements. Bronte connects with 9 Oakville transit bus routes and 1 GO bus route. The planned station's improvements include north platform improvements, east tunnel improvements, including 3 new elevators and access to south parking, relocation of Procore storage tracks on the south side of the corridor for improved station access. We're working with the town to discuss station improvements, including the station master plan concept and improved access for local transit. The Oakville GO station connects with 19 Oakville transit bus routes and 5 GO bus routes, including connections to Hamilton, Port Credit, Sheridan College, and York University. We have a pilot project we're working with you on of 2 electrical vehicle parking spaces, a Midtown Oakville Mobility Hub study, which was completed in 2012. We'll continue to work with town staff to discuss this mobility hub concept with plans for upgrades and improvements at the Oakville GO station. The Burlock Drive Underpass study area. The milestones on this project are that in the environmental process, notice of commencement was given in November, is being given in November 2017. Notice of completion in 2018. Public review early in 2018. Ministerial review in the spring of 2018, and hopefully a statement of completion in March 2018, with construction expected to begin in 2019 at the earliest. Some views of what that will look like. We're working with the town of Oakville on the Kerr Street underpass. The study for this was completed in in 2009. We are partnering with the town to build this overpass. This work will include widening Kerr Street and building a new underpass beneath the rail corridor, and construction is intended to begin in 2020. So we are planning for the electrification of the system. This shows the infrastructure that will be needed to support that. And finally, we always like to tell you a bit about what we're doing at Union Station, because we're trying to make improvements there, and the improvements that we make there are going to enable service to be enhanced here in Oakville. It's a complex environment. We're trying to do the things right for 2025, which will make it serviceable and allow us to increase service to Oakville. That is a team job that we're doing, and we are open to your suggestions. With that, I would say to you, thank you. It's going to be an exciting time during the construction of Regional Express Rail. I know we'll be imposing a bit on our customers and our municipalities with the impacts of that construction, but we'll do our very best to make sure that it allows people to continue to connect communities and get people where they want to go. I'll now pass this on to my colleague Leslie to provide a planning update before we take your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm Leslie Wu, Chief Planning Officer with Metrolinx. I'll talk a little bit about some planning work that we undertook, and first to thank the staff from the town of Oakville for their ongoing support and collaboration with us on a range of efforts. The station access plan was one such. We took, with the introduction of RER and 15-minute service, we revisited the amount of access that had been in place for all our GO stations and did a reset in terms of how we're going to address the dramatic change when we have all-day service and traffic flows, riders in and out. And recognizing that the historical expansion of parking is no longer and will not be a sustainable way forward. We talk about the importance, and we continue I'll talk about the Regional Transportation Plan 2041, but what this chart illustrates, in 2016, in 62% of riders that come to our stations do so by car. And a lesser percentage are either picked up or dropped off. That's about 15%. And really 8.5%, which is a very low percentage, come by public transit. As we expand the system and as we expand the amount of riders and the level of service and the frequency, it is important, which the chart on the right indicates, that we find other ways, modes, and means to bring people in and out, get people in and out of our stations, because we don't, first of all, the land area itself does not exist in order to support the growth that we would have to rely on if it was only by automobile that people were coming. As an anecdote, we did the analysis with 15-minute service to our Unionville station. If we continued at the same rate of parking surface expansion, we would need a piece of land the size of Canada's Wonderland. So clearly, that's not going to be happening for Unionville, and it's not a sustainable way forward. Peter talked about the capital expansion that is underway. This was born out of the 2008 Regional Transportation Plan that was entitled The Big Move. That set the stage for where we should be going in terms of mobility to the year 2031. Our legislation requires that we review that plan every 10 years, and we are at that anniversary. Last year, we published a discussion paper to raise a range of topics and issues that needed to be addressed as we think into the additional decade forward to 2041. And that draft was posted this fall, and we have been working closely, coming out to different councils, stakeholder workshops to get feedback on the plan itself. In terms of how we developed the draft transportation plan, it's important to acknowledge that not only was it what I call the technical exercise of the forecasting and modeling and the scenario planning that we undertook, but we, in addition, had a range of other mechanisms over the course of the last 2 years to seek feedback, whether it was through technical advisory committees, which involved municipal staff, and I know that the town of Oakville had representation at those tables, both the Planning Leaders Forum and our the Plan Technical Advisory Committee. In addition, we set up a residents reference panel. We sent 10,000 letters out to residents in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, and we selected to represent the region 36 individuals, the composition of which was meant to reflect the composition of the region. So that's a photo of the group there. 75% of them are actually representing, have automobile as their prime way of getting around, which reflects how the region is set. They geographically represented the region, demographically, in terms of age groups, education levels, and a full range of facets. They gave up 5 Saturdays to spend with us, and subsequently developed a really significant recommendations report, which we have posted publicly and which is one of the foundation pieces of the draft regional transportation plan. The plan itself does not dramatically alter the original vision of the big move from 2008. If anything, it makes it more succinct. We have tightened up the goals into 3 categories. The big move had a list of close to 21 goals. We thought that was quite a lot to remember, first of all, but it was easier to bundle them under 3 significant goals. The importance of strong connections, the notion that all travel experiences should be complete in terms of an end-to-end trip, and that part of the transportation network and system should be contributing to the sustainability of communities across the region. There are within the plan 5 key strategies. The first strategy is somewhat obvious, but worth separating out, which is completing the delivery of the current projects that have been identified and have full funding. And that's a really important, both those that are currently in delivery, so they're either in construction or existing, and those that are in development, those that were identified as part of the next wave priority pipeline of projects. The second strategy is builds from the fact that the big move made the case for expanding regional rapid transit, but now says with 100,000 people continuing to come to this region, we need to make sure that we create even more connections. And so that strategy talks about the introduction of what we refer to as a frequent rapid transit network. This is the idea that while we have local transit, we have LRT, BRT, we have subway in in the Toronto area, and we have regional express rail. There are 2 elements in the network that are missing, which we call priority bus, a priority bus network, and express regional bus system. And those are 2 new elements that we have introduced into the plan. The third strategy is ensuring that that investment, the $35 billion of hard infrastructure, is optimized and leveraged. And that speaks to issues such as service integration, fare integration, how we ensure that first and last mile of every trip is the range of options that need to be in place are in place, talking about how we leverage and really utilize our road and highway network at a better proportion. Currently, on average, is 1.2 people traveling in an automobile that can carry 5 people, which means we're underutilizing the road and highway infrastructure. And also how we address the network and its ability to move goods, not just moving people. Strategy 4 is a critical one. It's about the interface and intersection with our land use to the transportation network itself. Having the synchronicity of timing to ensure that the development that supports a station and transit-oriented development around the station is happening simultaneously and in a complementary way has been an ongoing challenge for the region. And in this way, Strategy 4 builds from the growth plan, the provincial growth plan, to leverage those policies to a heightened alignment with what's being invested. And finally, Strategy 5, which speaks to the pace of change that we are experiencing and the range of uncertain or currently undecided aspects that are before us, the disruptive technologies, autonomous vehicles, or other black swan events that lead up to or become part of the rising number of extreme weather events that we've witnessed that are part of our dealing with more adaptability and resilience for climate change, and things like the Internet of Things and how we're interfacing our road systems with our transit systems, with our water, wastewater systems, and our asset management systems, how we're pulling this all together. We're now in a place and time where we will have better capacity to address these pieces. Specifically in the current draft, there are projects are listed in sort of 3 categories. One, those that are already in delivery, so that would refer to the regional express rail service that has been announced and is under construction under Peter's leadership. We have those projects that are in development. The concept of a bus rapid transit on the east-west axis crossing from Toronto all the way through Halton. And then there are a number of proposed new routes, some of which are, there's the concept of some form of rapid transit along Trafalgar, going from the GO station up to Highway 407, a priority bus route, a series of priority bus routes, the concept of, by 2041, getting closer to more frequent service on the Milton corridor, and other priority bus routes on Brant and Derry Road, and of course Lakeshore West, extending the 15-minute service from Aldershot to Hamilton. This is just an illustration. I talked about the notion of the priority bus route, but the real emphasis on priority bus route is about speed and frequency, and in addition the concept that as the way and work is changing, it is now less of a 9-to-5 activity and has bridged the concept of the 18-hour day is something that's in discussion. Where people are working is changing, and how we can get our bus systems to work more effectively, in addition to what I call regular local transit service. In all, as we measured and modeled the combination of scenarios and projects, programs, and policies, we know that we can achieve higher degrees of walkability and access to rapid transit as a viable alternative to current single occupancy vehicle trips. One of the key objectives of the plan is to improve the amount of access to jobs. This is a heat map of the 2011 situation in terms of darker being the number and density of jobs and the access to them. And the current draft plan talks about dramatically increasing that across the region. Finally, the plan sets out basically what we think good looks like, what the future to 2041 should look like. And there is a second component to the draft which talks about how do we actually make it happen. And we recognize in the last 10 years some of the most successful endeavors that we've been to accomplish progress is where decision making has been clear and that the degree of collaboration has been high. And our ability to speed up to make progress is very dependent on that. And the second component is around the funding of the plan and the ability to have certainty and predictability around not only what are the projects we need for the future, but how and when they will be funded. And so that is an important conversation that needs to take place in tandem with the formal plan discussion. So finally, the draft, there's a link here on the website to the plan itself. We will be reporting to the Board of Directors in December on what we've heard and what would be our suggestions about the changes to the draft as it moves towards finalization, and a more discussion around how we can make it a plan that is useful for decision makers, providing the evidence in terms of what makes sense for the region. So with that, I think Peter and I would like to stop talking and open the floor, I guess, for questions.
Thank you very much. You have a few questions stacking up here. Let's start with Councillor Hutchins.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming, and it's very interesting, all of this. I have Ward 3 is, I'm in Ward 3 as the councillor for Ward 3, which is the GO station. I have some concerns about the present traffic congestion, particularly around the Cornwall Trafalgar and the new Cross Avenue and Trafalgar that will be happening once Midtown starts to take place. I'm wondering how you're going to proceed with helping the those particular intersections. As you know, they're particularly bad now with rush hours, particularly coming out of the town, and with a train arriving every 15 minutes from both directions. I think I see that's going to be a very difficult area. Yes.
I will start, and Peter may have additional things to add. I don't know why he keeps doing that. We, probably in 2012, we began working with the town on the mobility hub study for that area to begin to look at the integration of land use, density, the service we were providing. And in that exercise, and I know that exercise is constantly going through a refresh and update to make sure that it is current and relevant, it was clear that there were a number of interventions in terms of new roads that were needed to address the traffic, not only the traffic congestion today, but what might be coming when we move to this higher level of transit service. And so we continue to work very closely with the town and the staff to ensure that either both the land use planning work, the traffic studies that are in place are moving along to give us the right information about what is the capacity we need to be creating on our property in terms of our design of the station, and what other complementary pieces, or whether it has to do with the signaling and the synchronizing of the signaling, because we recognize that the roads have not historically been designed for the volumes of people moving in and out, or even the volumes of people living and working in and around, and that's going to dramatically change. So I would say that we are trying to work as closely as we can with the town to ensure that those pieces can come forward, and suggestions about pedestrian access, bicycle access, turning lanes, all that sort of stuff, the amount of buses, how they get in and out, the flow, that continues to be improved.
Well, with respect, it comes down to money. Mm-hmm. Okay, you can do a lot of things as long as you've got the funding to do it. But it is actually, where's the money?
So maybe I can ask Peter, he might have something to add, but I would also point out that nothing about making this region and the transportation network seamless is going to be accomplished financially by any one order of government. And so we've been working, we've been fortunate that the provincial government has, over the last several years, committed $35 billion to address the expansion component, and continues to assert its commitment to creating a better transportation network. But I think that the question you ask is going to be an ongoing one in terms of the ability of the other levels of government to participate as well. So I don't have a checkbook with me, is what I'm saying.
That's such a shame.
That,
We really could use a draft
I'm
or
not
two.
sure my personal checkbook might be not much use to you.
Well, my concern is the government, provincial government, is putting all this money into increasing the capacity of the railroad system, but they're not putting in the capacity of all the infrastructure around. Mm-hmm. So what's going to happen is you're going to be arriving every 15 minutes and pouring people out onto the same old streets and the same old bridges and same old everything, and we're just going to have traffic congestion and gridlock around it, and that's really is not going to help you, and it's not going to help us. Yes. Because you're going to need people to be able to get in and out to have an efficient transportation system. I have another question. The grade separations, you say there are 10, and you particularly talk about Kerr Street happening in 2020, which is great. But what's happening with Chartwell? I mean, if you've got a train arriving and departing every 15 minutes, you're going to be at that particular intersection, which is just before coming from Toronto just before the station, that level crossing is going up and down, and that crossing is also being used by the by the CN for a shunting yard as well. So there's a safety issue there as well.
So I think the theme, well, first of all, $43 billion does not go as far as it used to. That is definitely true. And what I think and as somebody who's new to the region, I'm impressed with the level of cooperation that there is between municipalities and Metrolinx, and with how much has been accomplished to date. And we're at the case that we were proposing 15-minute service, and that was the end of it. That would be a problem that might not be able to be solved. But I think the fact that the plan for increasing rail service comes with a commitment to plan for a generation beyond that is the promise of continued cooperation, and it's also making something possible that isn't possible today. Today, we get on the train and go to downtown Toronto, get on the train at downtown Toronto and come someplace else home at night. With the plan that we're advancing, the train stations will be the portal to go wherever you want to go in the region. And as well, working with each community, how you get to the station is a part of that equation. So I would agree with you. We have a lot of congestion now. We're going to have more congestion that needs to be managed as part of the improved rail service. But you have a commitment from us to work with you and invest to provide options for people that will make their lives better and hopefully solve some of their problems of dealing with that congestion.
Chartwell, great separation. I mean, Chartwell Road is going to head right into the QEW with the Midtown improvements. So it's going to become a main access route for the QEW going towards Toronto as well as coming off. So, I mean, I don't understand how you can be looking at Kerr Street separation without also looking at the Chartwell separation.
Well, we'll look at anything that you're willing to look at and work with you to come up together with solutions. And we're trying not to promise things we can't deliver. So we have prioritized grade separations around a level of investment that we can make right now. And as we bring service on over the next 7 to 10 years, we'll be working with you to look at those other situations that you would like to address. And if this is one of them, we will work with you on it.
Does anybody want to help the councillor out on this matter of Chartwell, and for that matter, the Midtown Transportation EA? It seems to me like Metrolinx and the public and council would benefit from a reminder about the Midtown Transportation EA at this point.
Certainly, the Midtown EA was approved, and it came after the Mobility Hub work and the Midtown secondary plan or official plan work that had been done that identified Midtown as one of the provincial urban growth centers. So we had worked with Metrolinx in looking at how we could rearrange the stations, and in fact the station would be accessed from all 4 quadrants as part of that. But in terms of the transportation network, as you had suggested, Councillor, there is a need to upgrade the infrastructure in these areas. So we had done an overall network EA that looked at a lot of transportation improvements that includes roads, access into the transit, as well as pedestrian and cycling. Particularly on Chartwell, access into the Midtown is from the south. Chartwell does not cross over the QEW. All the access over the QEW is from a single point, from Trafalgar, which it currently has, as well as a new grade separation that would go up and over in around the area of Town Hall, so just to the south of that. That's the only access that carries on over. Chartwell would have access up into the North Service area and could have access from the second interchange, which is, I think, in part answer to your first question, how are we resolving the transportation issues? One of the ways of doing that from the road capacity is to have a second interchange, which would allow traffic to come in from both of those locations into the Midtown, relieving a lot of the issues on Trafalgar. So that is the only access from Chartwell. That gives it, and maybe I should add, east-west, there's a connection across Cross Avenue, which would connect Trafalgar into the new interchange work that would carry on around Royal Windsor. So that's the full transportation network.
And this one final thing about this Chartwell grade separation concept, and bearing in mind that municipalities customarily pay half the cost of a grade sep, is there in fact on either Metrolinx or the town's books a Chartwell grade separation?
No, there isn't currently one on our books. I know that Peter had indicated that they are looking at all the grade separations across the railway line, so they may be looking at that, but not as the immediate term, the Kerr and Burloak or the immediate ones.
So maybe Metrolinx would clarify, you've identified 10 you're going to do, is Chartwell one of them?
I don't think Chartwell is on the current list of 10 that we're doing.
Thank you. It's good of you to clear those things up. And now we turn to Councillor Dunick.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation tonight. I have one question and then I have a comment. The question I have is, given that the Kerr Street grade separation, the EA was completed in 2009, now you're talking about 11 years before it's going to be implemented or construction starts. And I don't want to pit one area of town against the other, but Burloak is still going through their EA, and yet they're going to be starting sooner than ours. And people in the immediate area, when they hear this, they cannot believe that that's going on. Can you tell me why it's not moving forward in a timely manner?
I'll have to get back to you on, I don't have the answer to exactly what that schedule is. So I'd be happy to, through the mayor, bring that answer
I
back.
appreciate that. A little disappointing because...
To assist you at Metrolinx, the councillor actually speaks very eloquently for the town. It's the town's position that the Kerr Street separation is, very, very important. We have our check ready to go. We are strongly disappointed at the delay. We invite you to perform better, faster, sooner. Please.
We will do our best to do that, sir.
Thank you.
And I guess the other, again, it's not a question. You speak about collaboration and cooperation. Another crossing that we have in our ward is Fourth Line. And that whole project was less than stellar in terms of communication and implementation. And again, it left a very bad taste in everybody's mouth in the community that it was left incomplete for so long, to the point where we wanted to have 3 ribbon cuttings, okay? So I'd ask that you take that back to the staff that are responsible. They need to get a little better at that collaboration and cooperation, because Metrolinx doesn't have a really good reputation with some people in the ward right now, unfortunately. But I do appreciate you coming out tonight.
I will take those comments back to the team.
Councillor Chisholm.
I don't want to compound the issue in front of us, but there's a couple questions I want to ask about the Kerr Street separation too. Approved 209, and then we see this report coming in and it's 2020. Now, my first question, is that the start, the 2020, or would it be completed in the 2020?
My understanding is that the start is 2020.
So you know where I'm going with this with respect to 2020. You put another 2 or 3 years on it, it could be 2025 before this is completed. And knowing full well, as it was articulated by my colleagues, is that the money's in the bank or ready to go. The other, more as a statement than rather than a question, is that between Trafalgar Road and Kerr Street, the distance and the GO station being right in the middle of that, and the distance between Trafalgar Road and Kerr Street, it's enormous with respect to traffic congestion. The reality of it is we have what I call like barn boards on the tracks on Kerr Street for 2 lanes, 4 lanes going by, and it's very dangerous. We also have a stoplight within a block, and it's synchronized to the gates coming down, but it is a dangerous situation. My position, and to go on record, is that if we can make this a priority, because when you say there's 62% traffic coming and parking at the parking lot, it's coming from 2 ways. It's coming down Kerr Street or Trafalgar Road. Not much coming from north, mostly south, and we're having major traffic. So consideration, would you please consider that whole area is a very congested area, and that if we can get our grade separation done as quickly as possible, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's find out what Councillor O'Meara would like.
Mine pales in comparison. Thank you very much. Again, thanks for coming. And I know there's a lot of big projects, and Metrolink seems to talk on a large scale, and a lot of things are out of your control. One thing that we've been noticing in Toronto that they're doing is they're starting to look at some of the low-hanging fruit and how we can make things a little more expeditious and these sorts of things. And one thing I'm wondering about is the number of ticket stations at the Bronte, automated ticket stations. And the Bronte station, I know there's only one right now, and the lineups can be tremendous to get at that. And also Presto reloading machines. You know, as that station grows, I think those are some of the easy attainable things that we might be able to look at just to make the experience a little better for the guests, and also help expedite some of their requests. So I'm not sure if you might be able to take that back, but that's an easy one. So thank you very much.
And that is our plan, so I appreciate that suggestion.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara, and I bet you they're glad they didn't get beat up by you. Councillor Grant, what are you going to do?
Well, actually, I've been following with Metrolink since the early days of Rob McIsaac, and it does look like you're following in the spirit of what was discussed in the early days, and that's really good. Thank you. I've heard colloquially that the Oakville station, the GO station, in fact, is the second busiest next to the Union station. Is that true?
It is.
That's correct.
Could you then perhaps just outline some of the things you might be doing in the short term to improve upon the consumer side experience of the Oakville GO station? Because right now it's about as welcoming as a Cold War era nuclear bunker.
So it's a timely question, partly because our incoming new CEO has made it an important aspect of our attention to the customer experience on a range of fronts, and I'll name a few. So from a design excellence standpoint, the quality of the spaces that we are creating, we're trying to identify what I call short-term measures to elevate the physical appearance of our stations. Secondly, we are working to advance our wayfinding systems. So that's another kind of touch point for customers. We are beginning to establish, and it's one of the things on our strategic priority, to identify a retail strategy for all our stations. I sort of tipped our toe in the water in our partnership with Tim Hortons, where we selected a few sites to introduce Tim Hortons to some of our stations, and that's been quite successful. So we're looking to see whether or not we can continue that. We are looking to work with the local transit operators on a range of pilots on things like dynamic shuttles. We're working with anyone who will work with us on trying to experiment with alternates to traditional bus routes in terms of servicing communities that are not easily physically accessible because of the physical form of the land use, and that provides a whole other bunch of opportunities for customers. So there's quite a range of pieces that we're beginning to put in place. I mean, another related, it's not specific to the stations themselves, but our Presto technology is moving towards open payment, and that begins to provide a whole range of other new opportunities for our customers in terms of benefits.
All right. Well, if you could at least give it some consideration, or if there's something on the pike soon, that would be great. The Tim Hortons you mentioned is a trailer on the site.
You don't like it?
And I look at what you've done with Union Station. I look at what you've done with Kipling recently, and it's wonderful. And then I look at the little cold underground rat maze that we have here, and I wonder if we're the second busiest, why don't we have a bit more comfort when we're running through there?
I'd be happy to take that back and take a good look at the design of the station.
Councillor Lischina.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Hello, Mr. Zook and Ms. Wu. Thank you very much for your presentation. My question is, when you presented the slide with respect to the average weekly riders and how they get to the GO station, and then it was interesting to see in a few slides afterwards about the proposed Trafalgar LRT potential. And I'm just wondering if you're actually working backwards, because what happened in our town is that we have Oakville Transit, which is was supposed to be bringing people down to the GO station from the north. Councillor Adams and I represent the north and northeast. And when you built the extra parking, people went back into their cars, and now we have, again, worse than we thought before, congestion on Trafalgar and decreased ridership on our buses. So I'm glad to see that there's thought about these, extensions from 407 to the GO station, but it seems you build one thing, you take people out of the buses, increase the cars on the road, and then yet that's what you're trying to achieve, is to get them out of the car. Thank you.
So parking has become and continues to be one of the most challenging things for our organization on two fronts. We know that over the long term, providing parking is not a sustainable way forward, and we need to introduce a range of other options. And the sequence of time and timing of when those get introduced, your example of the large parking structure at Oakville could have perverse effects if we've put the parking that we need, in theory, to 2031 ahead of all these other pieces. So we're actually revisiting last year's parking strategy to take it to the next level. The parking strategy is said, here we are now, here's where we want to be in 2031. What's missing is the 5-year parking strategy, which talks about how we encourage other modes to be put in place. I think the other thing that we've been trying to do, not only at Oakville and at a lot of other stations, is to begin to think about parking as a short-term temporary use. So we are beginning to experiment with other, so there's ideas in other places where you can put up structures that are not permanent, that can be reutilized or revitalized in alternate uses that are more appropriate for a TOD. So we are beginning to explore that as well. And I think that's a kind of a range.
Well, I'm glad to see that, because I'm sure we're not the only place who got this kind of a backward action happening.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Worship. Couple quick questions. First of all, on your new control center at the Oakville GO train station, how many employees will be at that facility?
Yeah, it's never good to guess, is it? But I think it's about, 150 people, 200.
And have you determined parking needs for that particular group? I'm just concerned that I've actually had a constituent sort of question if the parking needs were assessed for that building when the parking garage was put up.
Yeah, it's incorporated into the quantum of the large structure that's right abutting the GTCC.
And do you have any sense of, I assume most of these are relocated employees?
Yeah, they're from some are new because we're getting ready for the RER system and the kind of communication systems that we'll need. We're co-locating a number of different operating functions into this building. So it's a combination of existing employees being consolidated and some new for additional functionality in the system.
Okay. And do you have any sense of how many of those would be using public transit versus driving their own vehicles?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I do know that we have a large portion of our employees that actually go to work and come to work by transit.
On the Oakville GO station page, you talk about your pilot project for 2 electric vehicle EV parking spaces. That's been a very long pilot. Do you have any conclusions as to whether that's been successful or not?
So I don't know the specifics of that, because the EV pilot is not just at that location. We have it at a couple other locations. I would say it's been moderate, the uptake on the EV, but that isn't surprising given the uptake on EVs in general is moderate, even with the incentive programs that the province has put in place.
So I'm clear not to be expressing a conflict of interest. I do have an EV vehicle myself, but I do not, I don't commute anymore, thank goodness. But what I'm hearing is that you're charging $250 a session, which is probably, for a lot of EV users, more than gas. And there's only 2 spots, so it makes it kind of difficult because somebody parks there and then it's basically there for 10 hours. So it's whether that's very useful in terms of determining success in a pilot. I think it's questionable. You'd need quite a few more if you really want to put your toe in the water on this front. And I think you're underestimating Oakville's number of EVs. We are home of one of the very few Tesla dealerships, and there's a lot of EVs riding around town, including town-owned vehicles. I think those are the only 2 questions. The other questions got answered by my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Adams.
Thank you very much. I have a couple questions for you. We've talked around the issue of parking at the GO stations a whole pile. Do you have some numbers around the utilization rates at the Oakville and Bronte stations?
I don't have them off the top of my head. I do know that prior to the structure, we were way beyond capacity without it. So I can't even guess actually right now on that. Please, if I could get back to you on that for both stations.
Okay. And then on this issue of reducing reliance on parking, what do you vision? And is paid parking a significant part of that? How do you imagine that working?
So the way we're approaching this is around providing a full range of choices. So and it means the improved infrastructure and systems and programs to encourage other modes. So whether it's shared parking, car share, giving priority to our smart commute users, working with municipalities, not just here in Oakville, but across the region on better bicycle infrastructure. So that includes connectivity of bike trails to the stations, improved pedestrian access, and so forth. We do know that pricing is a strong driver of people's habits. So we do know that the pricing of parking has the potential to push and shift different folks away from certain travel patterns. Currently, our reserved parking is a surrogate for pricing the value of parking. The reserved spots have a created value in terms of their preferential location and so forth. So we price that. But there has been an ongoing discussion around, at our board in particular, about the need to address the issue of pricing as a mechanism to address this mode shift that we're at. There has yet to be a definitive direction in that way, but it has been an ongoing conversation with members of our board.
So paid parking, maybe? That's kind of what I heard. Or more, I should say more paid parking.
I guess the way I would leave it with you is it is clear that pricing can be a driver of changing habits in terms of choices relative to a car or a bike or a bus.
Clearly it's an important element. So if you want to drive people back onto the local transit and off of parking, that's got to be one of the ways that you're doing it, right? And I guess what you've said is you're thinking about it.
Well, and I'm also saying that through reserve parking, we already have a degree of pricing in place. Yeah.
Right. So on that particular question of reserve parking versus, I'll say, day of use paid parking, is there a special premium being paid for those who are reserving a spot and may or may not be using it?
Could you repeat the question?
So if you've got reserve parking where somebody holds a spot all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that's not the same as I come in and I pay for the spot that I'm using that day. Do the reserved parking people pay a especially big premium for getting that?
So they pay a monthly, if you have a reserved spot, you pay a monthly fee for the spot.
And is that an especially big premium compared to if you were going to have a day-by-day parking?
Well, we don't have a day-by-day, so I wouldn't know how to compare it. Yeah.
Let me say,
Councillor, why don't you just ask her what the fee is?
It's a about $90 a month for reserved parking.
and so if you were going to have the two, the two options, because I think that's what you were saying a moment ago, is that your board was considering whether to have day-by-day parking?
No,
I'm not
that
sure if that's
wasn't
right.
what I said.
That isn't what you said,
The
okay.
board has considered the question about how we could expand or look at other ways of using pricing as a mechanism for parking to incent other types of choices or uses coming to our station.
Have they asked for a study to be conducted?
We, in 2013, as part of the investment strategy that Metrolinx conducted, we did an examination of a full range of revenue tools, including parking pricing. We looked at a whole wide range, congestion fees and so forth, and examined the potential for the entire region, and I'm happy to share that with anybody who's interested. It did go into
I
more
would like that.
detail. Yeah.
Thank you. Did any of that speak specifically to the Oakville sites?
No, it was a broad application across the region about the types of revenue tools and how much it could generate in terms of dedicated funding back into the system.
Great, I think that's wonderful. I'd like to see it. Can you tell me what your vision is for Trafalgar Road? There's, in the plan, it talks about BRT as well as LRT, and we're about to embark on a reconstruction of Trafalgar Road north of the QEW, starting late next year, going over the course of a couple of years, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't include LRT, so can you tell me what your vision is for it?
What I showed up there is our 2041 plan, so it sets out and identifies a potential rapid transit corridor along Trafalgar. In order to move to the next level in sequence, we would have to undertake a lot more work around initial business case that identifies what the best technology, the best routing. We would have to look at that to decide whether or not it was worthy to move forward in terms of additional work to further project definition and investment. So it's hard to say at this point. What that plan does set out is there is enough need in terms of future ridership, in terms of jobs and people in and around that corridor, that would warrant consideration for that corridor to be looked at for rapid transit.
Rapid transit, but LRT specifically? Because
as you noticed, it said
requires-
LRT/BRT, which
Yeah.
means we'd have to conduct a business case in order to determine the appropriate, we'd look at a range of options of routing and technology to determine what would be the most effective.
Okay, because as I understand, our current position is that it's a phasing in approach of basically an HOV with buses on the side, morphing over time towards something that might be more like a...
Yeah. I mean, we would work very closely with the town and the staff to understand what your ambitions are, how that would dovetail with the analysis, because when we look at any of these corridors, we not only look at the individual performance, but its contribution to the entire network, and we calibrate between those things in when we do our work.
Okay, and with respect to the operation of whether it be a BRT, an LRT, or a bus priority site, is there contemplation for help to the municipality in funding of the operations, or help to the municipality in funding the rolling stock that's involved, the buses or the whatever vehicles being used?
So I guess we have many different models in the region, and it's a question of who ultimately will own the asset. We have some projects that are, I'll use the Eglinton Crosstown. It's a design, build, finance, and maintain, and the TTC, we'll have a concession agreement with the TTC to operate. We are doing, and Peter can speak to this, a design, build, finance, operate, maintain for our own system in the Regional Express Rail. In here, Ontario, in Mississauga, that is a design, build, finance, operate, maintain, so it will not be Mississauga operating it. It'll be part of the agreement with the Project Co, whoever develops it. And then we have other projects in York Viva, where it is York region itself has created its own agency to operate in a separate agreement. So there are multiple ways that the project gets operated, and then the funding arrangements follow suit to that in terms of operating contributions.
So Trafalgar Road currently, as it stands, is basically an Oakville location. Over time, it might morph into something that goes all the way up through to Milton. We do already have a situation where we've got Dundas running across through to Burlington, and the Oakville system is, I'll say, substantially stronger than the Burlington system with respect to its fleet and operation. how do you propose to deal with cross-boundary issues in various locations?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
So Dundas is one of your locations that you've named as a
Yeah, that's a proposed corridor, yes.
a proposed corridor.
It's not a funded project yet, so we would have to go through quite a number of work to get to, and to be able to answer the question you're asking, so we're not quite there yet.
You also have one on the south side on the Spears corridor, so same thing. So you've got multiple locations. I just named that one as an example, but you've got multiple locations where you've got vehicles crossing a boundary from I'll say an Oakville transit location to a Burlington transit location or a Mississauga location. How do you make sure that you've got adequate frequency going across the entire stretch and that it's being met by other routes?
So if you remember when I presented Strategy 3, where we talked about the optimization of the network itself, I think the example you're describing, it doesn't have to wait for those two proposed projects. It exists today in terms of the coordination that has to happen between existing transit operators crossing boundaries. And there are a range of different mechanisms. Some are voluntary and collaborative between the two operators themselves in terms of synchronizing service planning and in terms of ensuring transfers between for customers between operating systems. In terms of those two specific lines, it wouldn't be dissimilar to two bus routes operating between Burlington and Oakville right now in terms of trying to get them to sync up together.
Last question, I suspect there may be others. My last thing is, you're only a few, I'm sure. That's a big issue. So your plan talks about trying to get 60% of kids walking or cycling to school. What mechanisms do you plan to use to try and make that happen, especially in?
So I think it's
especially in suburban.
Yeah, I think this is what mechanisms are we going to generate to do this, because this is not something that Metrolinx really can do on our own. We've been working with the board, the Ministry of Education and the school boards for the last 2 or 3 years. First started with a range of pilots with specific schools around education and practice with teachers, parent groups, and the students themselves around safety issues, a mechanism. This is something, for it to move, it's going to require not just our initiative, it's very much something that has to be part of working with the local municipalities, the school boards, parent groups, and so forth, to bring the opportunities for, they used to be called walking school buses, and education for parents and teachers to ensure that it is a viable option to reduce the number of car trips, and they're generally short car trips to schools, and replacing them with the right kind of pedestrian infrastructure, the right type of safety measures on those routes, and the correct kind of networks that are going to enable that. But I think that's something that we recognize in the plan as a necessary aspect of a high-functioning region. But we also recognize that Metrolinx does not have purview of the boards of education or so forth, and that would be something that we think and we would be happy to facilitate. But in the end, ultimately, it would have to be at the purview of the schools and the parents and the communities themselves.
Thank you very much. I have one last comment, and it's on your cycling map on map 9 in your document. I wonder whether you have coordinated this map with the most recent active transportation master plans from the region and the town, because I think there may be an extra crossing point contemplated across the 403 between Oakville going towards Mississauga.
So if we haven't, we will work with the staff to make sure we have the most accurate.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Elger.
Thank you very much for coming tonight. This is kind of a big thing to wrestle to the ground. I guess on slide 27, you talk about all the proposed. And can you remind me, is there any funding for any one of these projects at this point in time? Zero.
No, zero, yeah.
So if it's zero, then there's no timeline either, I take it.
Well, it's, we think based on the growth in the region and population that between now and 2041, there will be the need for these corridors to have this type of service.
the need, but no funding at this point.
Well,
for
yeah,
anything.
but I would remind everyone, this is a plan in the same way the big move was a plan with no funding. It represented, the key is that if it represents a consensus of what it is we need, that's the first step towards making the case for funding. So I think that's how I would kind of frame the proposed.
So you're in the big office there in Toronto, and I'm sure you talk to the other people, like those in charge of places to grow to 2041. I'm sure you've looked at those numbers. I guess my question would be, just how much worse is it going to get in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area from a road congestion point of view, because the transit isn't going to solve the problems?
So there are many ways, there are many parts to the question you ask. The growth is going to continue to come. The current multi-billion-dollar, $35 billion investment is going to significantly address our ability to, as the minister would say, deal with the catch-up. To remind everyone, 15 to 20 years of underinvestment in rapid transit expansion in the region is part of how we've landed where we've landed. So a significant amount of the rapid transit expansion is late coming, meaning it's part of the catch-up. And then the keep up is all the other pieces that are in the pipeline as well as proposed. So our goal is to keep pace with the growth so that we don't go backwards in terms of our inability to address the growth that's coming. So we have designed a plan to be consistent with the growth plan and also consistent with the ambitions of all the municipalities, hence why we've worked very closely with your planning staff in terms of official plans that are underway in the local municipalities to try and meter against that growth impact.
So you're saying the growth, the congestion on roads shouldn't get worse as we keep growing? Is that what you're saying? And we'll make sure the funding is there?
So the plan basically says if we want to move forward, if we want to retain a high quality of life, good prosperity, and sustainable communities, we need to keep building, we need to keep investing, we need to increase the amount of frequent rapid transit in the region, we need to optimize the infrastructure. So it's not just a matter of building hard infrastructure. There's a range of programs and systems that we need to build, fare integration, service integration, that we need to catch up on, and those begin to temper the difficult impacts of growth, the negative impacts of growth, because there are some positive impacts to growth, obviously, but we need to sort of mitigate in terms of keeping the region moving.
Good luck. Thank you.
Councillor Lapworth.
Thank you very much indeed for coming this evening. I was a very happy customer of yours from 1976 to 1980 when I worked in Toronto, lived in Brampton, and the only disappointment there would be the fact that the last train from Union to Brampton was only 6:30 p.m. and if you missed that, you've got to take the Via trip. But now you've got every 15 minutes going to almost midnight, I guess, so that's great. A couple of things I wanted to ask you about. The reserve parking spots, do you plan on increasing those both outside and inside the actual parking garages now? So we are constantly calibrating the number of reserve parking at all our stations to understand where the demand is and where the market is in terms of people's interest in having reserve parking. At the same time, simultaneously, we're always recalibrating the parking strategy itself. So it's an ongoing, it's something that we do on an ongoing basis. So I think you said to Councillor Adams, it's $90 for the outside spot. Roughly. I think, would you charge more for inside? We don't currently charge more. I know you don't, but I think you're considering it, right? Could we? We haven't looked at that, but that's an interesting idea. The other thing I noted here is valet parking. I know this might be a selected few persons that would want that, and it may attract a few extra people that would use the service rather than drive. Have you considered that? That's not something we've ever considered, but I might take that away for our Chief Marketing Officer. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You mentioned to Councillor Elder about working closely with staff. In the presentation, you talk about the Midtown Oakville Mobility Hub completed in 2012, and that Metrolinx will continue to work with town staff to discuss the concept and other plans. Under section 4.3, priority actions, there are a number of relevant and great points. We know that we're the second busiest station and that we're operating at capacity. Any idea in terms of timing for upgrades and improvements? Is there anything you can tell us other than, you know, it'd be in place by 2041?
The one thing I would say is that one of the things that the initial plan had laid out is, I mentioned the road network and the work leading up to the road network, some of which involves the region, some of which involves the town. And those are some of the, that starts to unlock a lot of capacity for development in around, which means people can actually walk closer and be closer to the station itself. We're consistently, our operations team are consistently looking for ways to improve how the flow of people in and out of the station. It's a similar response to the questions earlier about what are we doing in the short term. And so I think that still applies to your question.
Well, and that's appreciated, but
Yeah.
ultimately, as are the EV stations and the Tim
Yeah,
Hortons.
yeah.
But ultimately, the station, the platform's going to cross over to the east side of Trafalgar Road and the road networks. Just wondering if you have a tentative date or something that you'd be able to say, let's work toward this date to make it happen?
Peter can answer, but it's linked to the improvements for the regional express rail.
I don't have the exact dates, but we'll respond back. We're in the business of trying to attract customers to the service. And part of attracting customers to the service is that we need to have facilities that make them want to come back to them. So you can be sure that as the second most used
You've
station,
attracted a lot of customers.
we've attracted a lot of customers, and we want to keep those customers. So you can be sure we'll take that away this evening, some of the concerns we've heard, and be able to be responsive through staff and back through the mayor on the questions you've raised and give greater detailed responses.
Much appreciated. Any idea in terms of timing for
I
you
don't
getting
have
back?
the exact dates, but as I said, I'll go back and find out what's on the plan and respond back through, and happy to do that directly to you if you'd like.
Thank you so much.
Someday soon. It's a song. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you for coming this evening. I'm very happy with the progress that you're giving us on Burl Oak. I would just like to point out that many years ago, we had this thing online and it was going to happen, but our adjacent municipality decided to pull the plug on the cost sharing. It was being handled differently then. And then Burlington said, no, we decided that we can't give you the $7 million that we committed, and it fell apart. So you're back at us again, and we appreciate it.
Just to be fair to Burlington, they've put their money up for Burl Oak now. Burlington's on board with their check waiting for Burl Oak now.
Oh, I understand that.
Good news, right?
Yeah, I understand.
The neighbors are cooperating. Councillor Knoll for another time.
This will be very brief. You touched on the open payment changes to the Presto program, and I'm wondering if that would address the real-time nature of payment processing for Presto cards. One of the my personal experiences and also experiences I've heard from constituents is that the lack of real-time processing, for example, of recharging cards, can sometimes be problematic when somebody finds that their balance is at zero and they want to do an update while they're in a bus stop without a ticket booth. They can't do a real-time update with their credit card to their Presto card. I've spoken to our transit director a couple times about this, and they're aware of that concern and they've raised it as well. Is there plans to change that to make the entire payment processing process more real-time?
So I'm pausing because I actually don't know the answer, and so far as our Presto Executive Vice President, were he here, he'd be able to spout out every response. That being said, I am very aware of the issue that you described as a challenge, and to the first part of the question, would open payment address that? Well, open payment would be open payment like your credit card, which is far more real-time than the current Presto card is. But the issue you raised about the delay is something that I know our EVP has on the radar screen as one of the items we're hoping to address.
Well, it's a technical issue, and so they advertise it as 24 hours the card would be recharged. In reality, 95% of the cards are recharged within 4 hours, which doesn't solve that immediate problem. But that is part of the continued development of that service, which is happening. When we do get to an open payment architecture, it'll be immediate.
Yeah, I can just as a until recently parent of a student that went to school in high school, have spoken frequently to many of our peers, my parent peers, and that's one of the biggest problems is when junior says, I have no money left in my Presto card, and they're trying to get home from Toronto, they can't unless they beg for a temporary pass from the ticket collector. I'm glad you're taking it up, and I appreciate that very much. Look forward to an update on it.
Thank you very, oh, we have another repeat. Councillor Hutchins.
I'm just curious about the the uptake of the reserved spaces. Are there any available in Oakville, if someone wanted to, or is it completely full?
I'm going to have to apologize. I'm going to have to get back to you. I don't have that data right handy with me. I'm sorry. But we will come back to you with that information as soon as possible.
Well, the reason I'm asking is that might have an impact on what pricing of the rest of the thing. If you're spending $90 a month and it's completely full and there's a waiting list, you know, you might bump it up even further, but there still may not be any availability.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you very much for fielding so many questions. You heard from every single member of council, and that, I think, bespeaks the great interest of the Oakville population in the GO system and Metrolinx. As you yourselves mentioned, Oakville is the busiest station outside of Union. It was also the first GO station outside of Union. I wonder if in future the planners at Metrolinx would be good enough to give a forecast of the effect on the modal split in the community wherever you make a change to anything. I ask because if you'd put yourself to that trouble in your parking efforts in Oakville, we all could have noticed, you would have done it recognizing presumably you would then have been able to do it recognizing the negative impact on modal split here. We expanded our transit system by 50% and created a grid system out of a desire to greatly increase transit use, and we had a pretty good annual increase that totaled a 25% increase in bus traffic here, which your parking garage chopped off, and we haven't, if anything, we've lost passengers since. So you had an impact of perhaps not the desired result. Leslie, Ms. Wu, you may remember when I was on the GO board, I offered to give our bus system to the province, and it was this kind of impact that I had in mind. It struck me then and strikes me still that if you were responsible for the entire trip from end to end, you might be more responsible in what you do to us. And I'll just leave that with you as a question. Would you in future forecast the effect of your decisions on modal split in the local communities? The other question I have as a result of your presentation tonight is on page 10, you mentioned parking enhancements for Bronte, and I wonder if what do those words mean? Or I'll make the question sharper. How many more parking spots are you going to put in Bronte? Is that what parking enhancement means?
We'd have to check to get back to you. I'm not, that word can mean many things. Yeah, yeah.
I'm always grateful when words are more specific and less vague, and so that would be great to hear. And then finally, you mentioned fare integration, and I remember being very pleased at the invitation that the mayors and chairs of the GTA received to attend the historic co-meeting of the boards of the TTC and the GO. where I believe you presented on fare integration. And as a result of that meeting and listening to what was said there, my question tonight, and I don't expect you to be able to answer it now, but we need to know what fare integration is going to cost us. And we would urgently like to hear the answer to that question.
So I can give you an update on where the board is relative to fare integration. At our September board meeting, the board endorsed a way forward with a focus on four key areas that would begin to remove barriers to seamlessness of our fare system. So first is around double fares. We have a significant challenge around the Toronto boundary in particular, and you may have heard that there was an announcement around a discounted double fare subsequent to that, and the terms of which all the parties have agreed to, including the City of Toronto Council. The second area the board asked us to focus on is the double fare between the 905 and TTC, which doesn't directly impact Oakville, but that is an outstanding barrier to more seamless travel. The third is around the GO base fare. And that currently in our current system, for the number of short trips that happen, the GO short trip is not competitive with the local transit short trip, and that we should be looking at on how we can address that. The fourth is around fare policy issues. One of the other barriers within the 10 operators is the decisions that are made separately in terms of concessions and products. So definitions of seniors and the kinds of discounts for a senior vary across the region. And so from a traveler experience, if you're moving between and around the region, it's not a customer first approach. And how can we bring better alignment in both the concept of the concessions themselves or the products, so weekend passes that have variability or stuff like that. And then the final area that the board asked us to return with further work is what they call the longer term vision, which in our business case that we did for fare integration identified, while we looked at a range of concepts for how fares could be rethought of in the region, it was clear in the discussions with the operators and the municipalities and the stakeholders that, to your point, in addition to your point, that decision-making and funding was a key component of moving forward. And so the board has said that we're not going to move forward in terms of determining or declaring a preferred structure. Rather, we would like to go out and instructed us to go out and begin to understand of the work that was done in the business cases, how we would begin or what would be the key decision-making structures that would be enablers that everyone could agree to, and what would be the sort of funding mechanisms that everyone could agree to, recognizing that of all the 10 transit operators, they're unequal in the sense that some are large, some are small, some are in emerging communities, some are in mature urban areas. And so that is a piece of work, that last component that we're about to embark on. So that's where we are in the fare integration world.
So I have suggested to your officers, also to your board, that the most cooperative operators are the ones outside the TTC. Would you agree with that?
I think that's a loaded question insofar that we
work. We cooperate with each other.
Yeah, I would say that, you know.
And cooperation seems to end at the Toronto City border.
I'm not sure I would agree with that statement. You know, we've had great success in the maturing of the relationship with Toronto and TTC over the last 5 years, that having been there before and now where we are now. So I don't think I can endorse that statement.
All right. I appreciate your answers as to when. So I'm very excited about the grid that you painted up Bronte Road and up Trafalgar Road and across Dundas and across Spears and Cornwall with its connections outside. That's gold planning, and it suits our urban structure, and we couldn't be happier with it. And I note that there's no time promised for it, which is an improvement over the original Trafalgar BRT. I have a framed copy of the press release in 2006 saying that the Trafalgar BRT would be operating in 2016. And I still hope to live to see this promise. So thank you very much for bringing all your promises tonight. And if there's anything we can do to help move the rock up the mountain, our record is that we will do it. And I hope that I can phrase that as a question as, will you remember that and come back to us whenever you need help moving the rock up the hill?
We're always happy to have others help us move rocks uphill, so we take you up on that invitation.
It's a lovely answer. Thank you very much.
Okay.
That was operator error rather than technical error. It's now my pleasure to invite Milton Regional Councillor Mike Cluett to the podium. He is the Public Service Cabinet Chair for the United Way of Halton Hamilton, and I believe he wants to ask you to give him some money. Mr. Cluett.
There's always an ask, isn't there? And yeah, it's pretty much, I want to make sure our technology is not the same as yours in the town of Milton, so I just want to make sure. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. Well, good evening, Mayor Burton, members of council, staff, members of the public, and those viewing online. It's an honor to be standing here before you to speak with you. And my name is Mike Cluett, and in case you didn't know who I am, in addition to being a member of Milton Town Council and Halton Regional Councillor, I'm also a proud supporter and an advocate for the United Way of Halton and Hamilton. And I've also been joined here tonight by Meredith Burke, here in the back, who is the Associate Director of Resource Development, and Neil Gallant, excuse me, who is the co-chair, along with Jane Latter of the Oakville Employees Campaign as well. So I've been both a member of the Board of Directors and, like this year, a member of the fundraising cabinet for the United Way. And a cabinet is a team of amazing volunteers from both the business and the public sector coming together to help raise money and support the residents in our towns and cities to assure that we meet the fundraising goals and give the tools to those many agencies who the United Way is a partial or a full funder for. And I have two main goals here tonight as I speak to you. But first, I want to give you an update of where we are and where we are compared to last year. Early in the year, we were excited and pleased to announce changes to the United Way as the four United Way organizations of Burlington and Hamilton, Halton Hills, Milton, and the town of Oakville merged together to form the United Way of Halton and Hamilton. And combining and joining forces, we are now able to service our over 180 plus agencies and better, and as we streamline the application processes and our team focuses on what they do best, we are very confident that we can raise more money in each of our municipalities and provide better services for the agencies and the residents that we support. We here at the United Way of Halton and Hamilton are excited about these changes, and so are the agencies and our fundraising partners. One main takeaway from this merger is we want to make sure that we continue to stress that all monies that are raised locally by the United Way of Halton and Hamilton stay local. For instance, all the money that's raised in Milton will stay in Milton. All the money that's raised in Halton Hills will stay in Halton Hills. And all the money that's raised in Burlington and Hamilton will stay in Burlington and Hamilton. And most importantly for you, all the money raised in Oakville will stay in Oakville. The United Way of Halton and Hamilton and our excitement and enthusiasm built up recently for our 2017 campaign kickoff this past summer. High up on the Hamilton Airport, the United Way, along with UPS Canada, and many teams of fundraisers, some with very strong muscles, pulled a 200,000-pound Airbus as part of our fundraising campaign kickoff to reveal our goal of $10 million. While the amount of $10 million seems large, we feel that it is both a challenge and achievable goal to set. As we know, the most challenging of goals are the most satisfying goals when they are met. So now, how do we do that? The United Way of Hamilton and Halton also feels that the only way that we can be successful is with the continued help and support from our fundraising partners, like the town of Oakville, and the participation of all of your employees. Part of my mission tonight is to ensure that we pass along the thanks and gratitude to the many town of Oakville employees over the years with their outstanding efforts and generosity. Those who have made our past campaigns an overwhelming success and to ensure our future growth as well. This year, the town of Oakville employees have also set an ambitious goal to raise $80,000 to improve lives local here in Milton. And to date, they are very close to that goal, and you'll be hearing an announcement shortly, so stay tuned. We have also been very blessed to have the support of the mayor's annual golf tournament over the years, and as well has been a huge part of the past successes of the United Way campaign. So to Mayor Burton, thank you for all of your help and support. As I mentioned earlier, I have two objectives here tonight. First was to say thank you to all the employees in the town of Oakville for their efforts over the many years in being involved with the United Way campaign. Secondly is this. I would like to personally challenge the members of Oakville Town Council to be part of the fundraising campaign by donating at the leadership level through payroll deductions. The United Way of Halton and Hamilton is very close to achieving our 2017 goal of $10 million, and you can help. As members of Town Council and elected representatives of the people of Oakville, you can make a difference in the lives of the 1 in 3 Halton residents who use a United Way service. By participating in the town's campaign and making your own payroll pledge today, you can help us reach our goals and help even more people within the region. And I know many of you personally support the United Way in your campaigns and the events that are held throughout the year. Councillor Chisholm as well, Councillor Giddings in the past, and many others have joined us throughout the events throughout the year, and I'd like to say thank you. But by making a payroll pledge to support the town's campaign for the United Way of Halton and Hamilton, it will get us much closer to that fundraising goal of $10 million. I myself, excuse me, have donated at the leadership level of $1,200 per year for the town of Milton's campaign, as I want to ensure the success in the future campaigns for the United Way. So today I'm asking peer-to-peer, council member to council member, elected official to elected official, that if you already haven't done so, please join me in making, as many others, and sign your payroll pledge to support the United Way at the leadership level. And again, I do want to stress upon you that all the money that's raised and collected here locally stays here locally. The United Way of Halton and Hamilton is proud to count on the Town of Oakville organization and all of your employees as one of the most important partners. We both strive towards the shared objective of advocating on behalf of each Oakville resident, including those who, unlucky breaks, have made life challenging or filled with despair, to build a community where hope, health, and happiness is within everyone's reach. Together, we are a possibility. So again, thank you for your time, attention, and support, once again for the United Way of Halton and Hamilton, and I look forward to your continuing support over the coming years as we work together for our main goal, and that's improving lives locally. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cluett. Councillor Giddings has a question for you.
Thanks for coming out, Councillor. I didn't have to fill my note. I did it online before you came, so I just
That's great.
Just want to let you know that. So did you
Can
also...
we make sure of that there, Martin? We'll make sure
I think
of that.
Neil will confirm that. I think it's important for people that may be watching this online to also know that if they work in another municipality or another city or another community, when they fill out their form for the United Way, they can tick off that they'd like it to be designated towards their home municipality of Oakville, or Milton in your case. And so that is something that we always like reminding people of. As a past board member of the Oakville United Way, I too have seen the value and the very real differences that can be made. So thanks for coming out.
No, I appreciate that, and that's a great segue to the point where if you do have constituents who are interested in the United Way, or just if you're in passing, having discussions with people, it's called the designating back to your local community. So if you are in Toronto participating in the United Way campaign, you can always check off that box to donate back to your local municipality. And over the last number of years, we've actually had a lot of success with that. A lot of people saying, well, I give in Toronto and it stays in Toronto. Well, no, you can check off that box and designate and give yourself locally. So thanks for bringing that up.
Where would they find that box on their checkoff form?
Well, they would have to work in conjunction with their employee, the United Way employee representative, but on the forms on the pledge sheet, there is a box, I believe, on the front or the back part of the page, and hopefully Meredith can throw something at me to remind me where it is.
Is it still in pale type on the back?
On the paper form, it is, as you mentioned, online it's different. I believe it has a bigger...
Let's hear it for online. Okay.
Online is so much greater.
You're not out of reaction yet. Councillor Elgar has a question.
Thank you, and thanks for coming down.
No problem.
Come across the border at Oakville. There's been a lot of negative talk in the last number of years about charities, and a lot has gone to administration. And I wonder if you can just highlight how small the amount is administrative cost for the United Way. I think it's probably at the top for the dollars that are actually, of every dollar received, I think it's 91 cents it goes to the person or to the charity of the choice.
To the fundraising agencies, yes. There are many things that are circulating around on the internet when it comes to CEO pays and everything else, but when it comes to especially, I don't know exactly what the new amalgamated United Way percentage is, but it is still one of the lowest in administrative costs, and the majority of the money that is raised throughout these fundraising campaigns, in that 90 to 91% range, does go to the agencies. And that's one of the most important things that we want to continue to stress is our low administrative costs in order to do that, because a lot of the money, we want to make sure the majority of the money comes to the people that need it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think people should know that, because you hear people are not going to give any more to some things because it might over 30% is going to the administration of the fundraising.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If anybody watching at home wants to do their own research, the Canada Revenue Agency has a section on their website for all charities, and it shows in black and white and numbers what the share is for administrative costs for any of the charities that you might donate to. Councillor Cluett, thanks very much for coming. It's great working with you, and we'll see you at Regional Council.
Absolutely. Thanks again, everybody. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Council, it's my pleasure now to announce the proclamation of Ian Anderson House Week for November 26th to December 2nd, 2017. And with your indulgence, I'd like to read the proclamation because it does, I think, a nice job of reminding everybody what a service Ian Anderson House provides our community. Whereas in 1997, Oakville's Ian Anderson House was the first in-resident cancer hospice to open in Ontario, and whereas the hospice was the vision of Mrs. Margaret Anderson, created in memory of her husband who was claimed by cancer at the age of 59, and whereas the mission of Ian Anderson House has always been to provide loving care, support, and dignity to its residents, and whereas since the opening of the hospice, Mrs. Anderson has remained in the house as a volunteer executive director and board member, and has acted as a strong advocate for the residential hospice movement, and whereas the 20-year anniversary of the hospice is a tribute to Mrs. Anderson and her determination to shape the attitudes towards caring for the dying by physicians, legislators, media, and the public. Now, therefore, I hereby proclaim November 26th to December 2nd as Ian Anderson House Week in the town of Oakville. And it's a very well-deserved honor. Thank you very much, everyone, for hearing that out. I now would like to ask Council for your consideration of the standing committee reports from Community Services and Administrative Services from November 13th. Councillor Lischina, you're moving adoption. Councillor Grant, you're seconding. All those in favor? And the reports are adopted. Thank you. Council, we now have our consent items. This is when we find out if they're really consent items. One is the library strategic plan, which you've all had an opportunity to review the years in the making strat plan, and the other is the council chamber renovations. How do you wish to proceed? Councillor Elgar?
Mayor Burton, I would like to separate item number 2.
Thank you. Is there a mover for the library strategic plan? Councillor Knoll? Is there a seconder? Councillor O'Meara? Any discussion? Shall I put the vote? All in favor? And that's carried. Councillor Elgar?
Thank you very much. I read the report. Seemed like we were maybe getting something a little fancier than we needed, and then when I looked at it closer, and I realized that we're actually reducing the general public seating by 25% in this chamber. And when I found out that it's going to cost $2,067,000, I think that maybe it's time to go back to ground zero and take a look what we can do as a council to minimize the costs. I just am shocked that knowing that development charges, we're not allowed to charge anything development charges because of growth. This is all due to growth. And when I look at this council chamber and the seating we have, I'm fully prepared to fund whatever it takes to make accessibility totally accessible for the people that need that. And from what I can see in the plan we have, it only was for 4 seats anyhow. And you can see right there where they belong. The rows of seats for the public have reduced by 25% from 12 rows to 9. So 3 on 12 gives you 25. Behind us, we've got where the judge used to sit. And I checked it out today, and tonight I should say, and I can't think of a better viewing spot for the mayor to see the councillors when they put their hand up. It is perfect. And I've got to say, I think we can do it for an awful lot less. And I think Bern Duddick and I with the jackhammer could take out the prisoner's box. We've talked about that over the years. And I don't want to receive the report. I would ask it would be referred back to staff and come up with something that'll do what we want to do, which is add 2 additional councillors right down here. And the mayor and the clerk could sit up there and have a beautiful bird's eye view of all the council. And also for the public to keep the accessibility people, more accessibility seats, and not take away all the general seating from the public. I see more people coming to a meeting on planning and development than I see reducing. Like, I don't get it. And for $2 million, I think there's an awful lot better thing we could do than have a huge change to this chamber. I find that I like the chamber. Our voice, we finally got the sound system working pretty good here. We've got screens. They're talking about fancy screens. We're here to listen to the people. We're not here to work with the touch screens, screwing around with their presentations. So I'm hoping that staff will support referring it back to staff, come up with a skinny plan, I would call it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Councillor Chisholm?
I echo Councillor Elgar's comments. $2 million for a reno, I wasn't even aware of that until Councillor Elgar brought it forward. I think we can do a lot better with respect to the design instead of a full-fledged reduction of seating capacity. And there's something in what Councillor Elgar is saying about reshifting and redoing would probably reduce our cost dramatically. Thank you.
Councillor Adam.
Could we hear from staff regarding this project, please?
Thank you. We did have a presentation if needed, but you do see the floor plans out there. I have a cost breakdown that I can present on the overhead, but before I do that, I'd like to call your attention to a few points. The number of seats, although the number of pews has reduced, the number of seats is reduced for the public somewhere between 10 and 20, depending on how many people we put in a pew. The overall seating is very similar to what it was before. We started this project to allow for 2 new councillors based on the new ward structure. we wanted to take this opportunity to remove the judge's dais, which has been there for some time, and to remove the prisoner's box. But along the way, as we started to do the design for this work, we realized and recognized that the IT infrastructure is 14 years old and it's coming to its end of life. So while things may be working, there are great lengths that we go to tune it and try to keep it running from month to month. Secondly, the room does not meet AODA standards. It was constructed according to building code in 2003, and the slope on the floor is not wheelchair accessible for somebody. If we were to have a counselor who needed a wheelchair, they would not be able to comfortably get down to this area. So the accommodation is not just the wheelchair places that you see, although on the floor plan there's an important component in that people can come up here and do their turning around, and it supports a wheelchair radius. There's also one down here if we were to have a counselor who needed a wheelchair and some other, or a member of staff who needed a wheelchair. And also the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning is at the end of life. It's quite old and it needs to be entirely replaced. And for those of you who've been here on a hot summer night, you know how uncomfortable it may get. So this is not just a cosmetic change of a facility, it's a complete overhaul of the facility. The slope of the floor will be changed. There will be accessible areas for wheelchairs and wheelchair turning. The heating and ventilating will be done, and the end-of-life support system that you're using in IT will be replaced. If I could get... as well as the atrium. Oh, yes, thank you. I forgot to mention that we are also making significant improvements to the atrium. So the overflow area will be much more convenient. The overhead projector will be replaced with a matrix of television screens so that you can see them on sunny nights, and it will be much more convenient to go to the atrium to view council should there be overflow, and those screens will be supported right through to the, well, permanently. And the south atrium will serve as the interim council chamber from March to February as we're working on that. I can show you the cost, but can you pull up the one that says item 2, Gord Lalonde? So this is a breakdown. The interior, raised floor, ceiling lighting, and HVAC, those structures that I talked about are about $638,000. The communications and IT infrastructure, this is not the computers that you would be using or the touchpads or what have you. This is the actual cabling that gets pulled through the floor, goes to back closets and so on. It's about $127,000. The millwork and benching, that will be new podiums for council, new seating for staff, change to the pews. They will be padded. We did have to remove some to make way for wheelchair accessibility. The costs there are about $204,000. The new computer hardware will cost about $449,000. This includes improvements to the south atrium where we will see the permanent television screens and presentation aids that will be going up there. The consultants, the permits, and so on is about $314,000. Project management is $109,000. There's a contingency of $117,000, and all of the overhead and costs of this contract in terms of profits and so on come out to about $290,000. So that is how it breaks down. I can tell you that the planning effort to get to this place has been quite extensive. We did try out many, many different designs, including using the judge's dais as a sightline. But it does improve the sight lines for all of the council, so you can see each other. The mayor can see who is raising their hand much more easily than before, and this item is scheduled to go to budget committee. I guess it will be tabled in your book tomorrow. So that is a brief summary of it, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Before I go to repeats, I want to say that I hope everybody's heard that the seat reduction isn't as extreme as feared, and that the design does move the mayor back into the alcove. It just doesn't leave me above you looking down at the backs of your heads, which is what would happen if I moved up there as it is now. So for these reasons and the ones that the commissioner has outlined, I strongly support this plan, this design, and I urge you to support it too. I believe that you will have a much better set of working conditions and that the public will benefit as well. So with that, I will turn to first-timer Councillor O'Meara, and then Councillor Robinson, and then Councillor Giddings, and then we'll go back to Noel, and then we'll do second-timers. So Councillor O'Meara.
I'll just be brief, and as soon as you start talking about the guts of the place, I get it. Like, HVAC is expensive, redoing floors, cabling, wiring, I understand that. So I'm thankful that you brought the breakdown here, because I didn't know it was that elaborate. I thought it was just moving the deck chairs around a little bit, but I'll be supporting the motion as well. I think that's a great breakdown of what it is, exactly what we're doing, and the improvements to the atrium. It makes sense, and that number makes a lot more sense now. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, sir, to staff, I guess, Mr. Lalonde, when was the last time we did this? What did we do, and how much did it cost?
I cannot remember how much it costs. I checked the records today. The last, the upgrade to this facility was done in 2003. The first council meeting was held here in 2004. And it was a very major renovation. I don't know if you recall, but our overhead projection system was a screen on the side wall that we used an overhead projector for. It changed the flavor of the council chamber. This one is designed basically, I mean, aside from the infrastructure elements that I told you about, this is to make the council chamber into a council chamber. It was originally designed as a courtroom. It has the courtroom feel about it. It has, and we want to make it into a council chamber that is the home for council.
So, I'm sorry, you really can't give us an estimate of what we paid then in 2003?
I'm sorry, I can't remember. I can look that up and I can provide it. I'm afraid the number that's in my head would be wrong, but I can tell you certainly it was 2003. So this council chamber is about 14 years old.
Okay, thanks, Your Worship.
Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Has this been tendered already, or is that the anticipated costs?
These are the anticipated costs. We did hire a consultant to help us with the design and to do the estimates. So these estimates have been created by our staff and our consultants, but it has not yet gone to tender and will not go until we have budget approval.
And the bottom 290K, that's strictly for, looks like 15%, that's strictly contingency?
The way we do our estimates is we estimate all of the various costs per square foot basis and so on, and then we estimate a profit, which we're calling overhead for the consultant, which is in that bottom line, along with a few other items, so that we don't make it as easily clear as it might be.
Last question. What's your drop deadline for the next council that'll be meeting here just over a year from now?
Our deadlines are very tight. We would have to start construction in March. Our plan was to issue the RFP in January, begin construction in March. We would have a temporary facility set up for you in the south atrium, so this furniture would move into the south atrium. That would remain there. And we would have the inaugural meeting. There's about 9 months of construction work in gutting the facility, and we would have the inaugural meeting on December 2nd, 2018, back in the new facility.
So we've got a month or two of wiggle room in terms of bidding, tendering process?
I would say we have very little room. Preparing a tender is one piece of the work, but then it has to go out and it has to remain available for 25 or 30 days, and then you have to give people a chance to respond and then select your person. So we're very tight.
And this is coming to budget this week?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you for the presentation. You raised the issue of the AODA compliance aspects of this. Do you have a sense of what we would be required to spend of this budget anyway just to comply with AODA? Because I would imagine that in addition to the slope flooring and the accessibility for employees and councillors, you'd also have to be dealing with technology around closed captioning and descriptive text and things like that.
The AODA requirements are embedded in many of the different items. The floor alone, to fix the floor, is $235,000.
And based on this proposal, will this be including things like descriptive text, display screens and things like that?
Yes.
Okay. Your Worship, I like you support this proposal, so I'll be voting in favor of it.
Thank you, Councillor Knoll. Councillor Hutchins.
Thank you. I was curious about the audiovisual between the council's chamber and any overflow. Is it going to be like Skype? It's going to be two-way so that people here can see and they can see us and we can talk backwards and forwards?
We can easily do that. The quality of the presentation in the other room will be quite strikingly better than what we are used to. The difference between the television presentation and the projector presentation is frankly startling. Our experience, though, is that people do not want to present to you from another room. We have tried microphone links from overflow to council chamber, and by and large, they are not used at all. People don't mind watching the proceedings and then coming here to present their position, their delegation. If people wanted to make use of that, we could easily make it available. It's a small item, but I don't think it would be widely used.
Councillor Chisholm.
With respect to report, I guess the way I was reading this was more because of the new two councillors that we have to have on here. So I'm leaning towards what you're saying, because I wish that information was in the report before I made comment on it, but as the report stands, it's very limited on the scope, and with respect with the accessibility, I understand that completely, as I was part of that when I was with the town as an employee, and it does become a costly factor with respect to the built environment. Having said that, this is the platform for a total renovation. This is not, and I was under the impression this was just something we're trying to do for two, so I do apologize for that, but as we move forward, I'd like to see what the dollar amount will be when we get into the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elgar?
It's already jumped up to over 200,000 from the number I received this morning. So is the number 2,067,000, or is it the number you just put up here, 2,250,000?
I think you will find that in the budget presentation, I think the line item for this is 1.9 million. The number changes around because some of the budget was in 2017, so we've paid for our consultants, and the improvements to the atrium are in another line. So for the purposes of this meeting, I consolidated everything so that you could see a complete picture of what this project costs. So that's why the numbers are changing around.
So I'm trying to figure out, and hopefully you can help me, is how you can pack more people in a row that's going to be no longer than the existing seating, and you've cut down 3. Like, how many people are going in each row? You got 4 rows for the public on one side, and you got 5 rows for the public on the other side. And I'm talking the public, like not for staff and the and the EMT team, and the very back. I'm discounting that also.
Yes, there's more seating available for staff and for other people who have special interests in the meeting that we feel could be used for the public if there is a busy night. And also, there's some flexibility in the calculation. It depends on how many people you think will fit into a queue, or into a pew, I'm sorry, and that varies between 18 and 24 inches. If you use the 24 inches per person in the pew, the overall seating has dropped by 20 overall. So on 200 or so, the overall population dropped by 20. If you reduce the number of inches that you get per seat, then that reduction is much lower. And as I said, the change is mainly towards staff seating and special needs seating, such as our reporters. And our feeling was that if it was a busy night, we would give up some of those seatings to the public.
But that's not what's is in the design at all. Like, am I wrong that, maybe I'm wrong in reading the design, but on the new design, you've only got 4 rows for the public on that side and 5 rows on this side for the public. Am I reading it, is the plan wrong, or is it plan right?
The plan is correct.
Okay, so you got 9 rows.
The number of pews is reduced. The number of people who will sit in the pews is also reduced because there's less pews, but the shape of the pews has changed. And we have additional seating for staff that, as I said, would be used for the public if needs be.
But it's still being cut. Like, the numbers are being cut.
The number of pews is reduced.
Okay, how many people do they project are going to be sitting in the public, what's specified as public area? What is the number today? I'm sure we got that information.
Just give me 1 minute. Okay?
Sure, yeah, because I realized that we got to have all that.
You can't squeeze more than 10 per pew, right? There's 90.
Well, let's see. I don't know, this doesn't, I got trouble with having less people as we're growing.
So the current estimate for staff, for everybody in the room, is 178 to 156. So the total reduction is from 178 to 156.
How many for the public? Which is what we're really here to hear from too, as well as staff.
Currently, the public gallery, I'm trying to do arithmetic in my head, so you have to give me a minute here. Currently, the public gallery is seating for 153 people. And if you use if you use 18 inches per person, the pews will, if you use 24 inches per person, the pews will hold 115 people. If you assume the pews will be occupied by 18 inches of person, the number is approximately 140. So it goes from 153 to 140. And as a practical matter, it's probably between those two numbers.
So we're going to squeeze it from 24, 2 feet to 18 inches? That's what, and everybody's going to have an individual seat at 18 inches?
Those are the estimates that we used for calculating the seating capacity in the new facility. So the amount of space you take up when you calculate for the new people, so we knew the number of pews is gone, so we measured the pews, and we calculated if we give everybody 24 inches, answer that again, sorry, I forget. If we give everybody 24 inches, the gallery seating drops from 153 to 115.
Right.
If you give everybody 18 inches, which is probably the narrower side of things, then it drops to about 140.
Okay.
The reality is probably somewhere in the middle of those two.
Yeah. Well, I'll take a look when I go home tonight on when we had the Glen Abbey meeting here to see how many were in a pew, because it was full. And I don't think they could have squeezed another one in there, so I'll do account of that. With regard to moving people to the atrium, I've got a huge issue with that, because we as council have no idea how many are there. It wasn't like the Glen Abbey was a perfect example. I wasn't sure whether it was 2 or 200 sitting in the gallery. except from, thank goodness, some people shot out some stuff on YouTube and pictures of all the people there. So, like, as a council, I feel we're totally disconnected from anyone that's not in here that wants to speak to us, and we know how, we get a feeling for it. So, I don't like the plan. I think it's a total, in my opinion, total waste of money, and at the required time, I'll ask for a recorded vote. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Grant.
Not to get caught up in the minutia of all of this with seating, but right now, in fact, at most meetings, I do see about 3 rows of staff normally. So what you're proposing is that we're actually going to redistribute the staff to certain areas, and the seats that would probably not be available to the public now would be freed up?
I think what you would probably see is staff coming in when their item comes up. Quite often what happens is staff go and watch the proceedings on the internet. We typically come and sit in here and watch the proceedings go by. If it was a crowded night or a crowded afternoon, then we would ask that staff view it and come when their item comes up.
And just additionally, I want to throw my hat into the idea with, I believe Councillor Hutchins brought it up, and Councillor Elgar's alluded to it, but if we are getting new technology, it wouldn't be a bad idea for us to have some kind of screen-in-screen ability to see who's in the auditorium sitting in the south atrium, so that we know there's a group there that, if we may need to make the meeting go longer because there's somebody there who's waving a sign that they're going to come upstairs, it would be a good idea for us to hold off for a bit.
I'm not sure that's included in the plan in this time, but I know for a fact that it can be done.
Councillor Adams.
Thank you for all the information. I appreciate you giving us that detail. I'm not sure I could possibly agree with the 18-inch concept. That's a Air Canada seat width. So I mean, yes, it's possible, but it's not comfortable. The other thing I wondered is, could you give us some of the detail from the last renovation? Because I recall a great deal of discussion and debate about the last renovation happening as well, and it being a fairly pricey renovation back then.
We would be happy to do that. I just have to look up the material. I do remember extensive discussions about it from the last.
And I remember the design. It was like a design by committee of council almost. It was a very lengthy back and forth thing, as I recall it. Do you remember that as well? I'm not wrong about that, right? Okay.
One of the major difficulties and changes between last time and this time was the design features that we came up with also had to meet the court. So we had to deal with the Ministry of the Attorney General, and you'll remember the tables that were here in the front at some point. So it was a very complex design procedure, and we really our philosophy is to try and develop a very good council chamber and not a hybrid structure.
So I appreciate that, all of that discussion. The only question I'll ask you is on this issue of the public gallery. I remember the last time we had this debate, I don't know if everybody remembers, but the old pews that we had didn't even have cushions. They were just rock hard wood. And I remember sitting on them watching council proceedings, and if you had to sit for more than half an hour, it was super painful. And I wonder, could you tell us what these new seats are like, first of all, and second, I'm looking at the design back here and the one that we've got in the black and white version that we've got in our agenda. Was there consideration given to spreading out the 2 wings a little bit more to try and get another set of seats in, another bench?
Yes, we gave some very careful consideration. Early designs had the U much more like a V, and then it had pews behind the council chamber, or behind councilors, and we had pews, less pews, but on that side of the room, and we felt that it would be inappropriate to have a gallery staring over the shoulder of council, so we changed the design so that there is nobody sitting behind councilors. Your screens will be private to you as you're going about your deliberations. But there was consideration given to it.
Okay, and the last question I'll ask, with the 7 and 7 on either side, is the intention to split Ward 4 in half? who gets split
Councillor,
up.
we once upon a time sat alphabetically, and
I know.
I could invite everybody to consider returning to the historic way of sitting.
Having experienced both, I very much appreciate having my ward mate next to me, so that when we're debating things that are ward specific, you can confer easily and have a side discussion as required. So I note that one ward in this design ends up having to be split, and whether there was consideration for that.
All right. Well, I think it's time for a vote to receive. Apparently, we're going to have a recorded vote on receiving. Councillor Knoll?
I'm sorry, I just had another quick comment. Notwithstanding how this is disposed of this evening, it will probably come back in some form, whether deferred or as a recommendation to budget. I think it's already there. Can we get a breakdown at budget of the AODA mandatory expenditures as well? Because I'm guessing, based on looking at this, you already told us 227 for the slope floor. I imagine that's a very large portion of this budget, and I'd like to know what that is.
We can put those numbers together, and I think I do my presentation of the budget overview on Thursday, and I can provide you with that on Thursday during my presentation.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you very much.
All right, Councillor Adams.
Councillor Knoll brought up a good question. He does it often. What's the next step? So I know it has to go through the budget for the capital piece, but what's the next step in terms of approval of the process?
If the budget is approved, we will issue an RFP based on these drawings. We will hire a general contractor to start work in February, and construction will begin. We will move the council chambers to the temporary location. So there are not more approvals after the budget is allocated. So this is the design that we are proposing, and in staff's mind, this is the final design proposal. And if we get budget approval, then we will carry on with the construction.
All right. If we can get a mover and seconder, we'll have a vote. Councillor Knoll is moving. Councillor O'Meara is seconding. We're having a recorded vote. To be recorded in favor, please rise to be named. Councillor Lischina, Councillor Adams, Councillor Grant, Councillor Knoll, Mayor Burton, Councillor Hutchins, and Councillor O'Meara. To be registered against, please rise to be named. Councillor Lapworth, Councillor Elgar, Councillor Giddings, Councillor Chisholm, and Councillor Duddick, and Councillor Robinson. The motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Council, the next item is the 2018 Council and Committee meeting schedule. How do you wish to dispose of this? Councillor Giddings.
Unless anyone needs to go through it, I'd be happy to move it.
Is there a seconder? Sure. Councillor Elgar. Is there discussion? All in favor? That one carries. Thank you. We next have the 2018 council appointment to various committees. Councillor Duddick?
Your Worship, I would be pleased to move the staff recommendation with the exception of 3C, which pertains to site plan. I will remove my name in an effort to maintain our geographical balance of south and north, and have Councillor Chisholm remain on. So I'm just moving that.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Knoll?
I'd be happy to second it, but I do have also a change on Appeals Committee. I didn't realize that Councillor Grant still wanted to be a member of the Appeals Committee. He really loves those dogs. So I will relinquish my interest in that in favor of Councillor Grant.
So, Councillor Duddick, will you include that in your motion?
Not a problem.
Anyone else? Councillor Chisholm? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is carried and adopted. Thank you, everybody. You have an addendum with the Development Charges Steering Committee minutes. How do you wish to deal with that? Councillor O'Meara is kind enough to move it. Who will second it? Councillor Knoll. All in favor? Thank you. That's carried. Council, you have your status of outstanding issues electronically. Pardon? I just did that. Councillor O'Meara and Councillor Knoll. No, I didn't call that.
Oh, okay.
Councillor Grant is moving the Metrolinx report. No one wants to second it, so. Oh, Councillor Lischenna is seconding it. Of course.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We had a really long conversation about this, and I didn't want to let it just sail by quite so fast. I want to thank our staff for all of the detailed work that they put into providing response material to Metrolinx. I noted that a number of council members had special concerns about the parking issues around the GO stations, and I note that our staff have already mentioned those parking issues in the report, and I appreciate that. I do wonder whether or not we could beef it up, I'll say. I note that on page 129 of the agenda, you talk about Metrolinx needing to develop a strategy to reduce the reliance on parking at stations and encouraging Metrolinx to provide more emphasis on the need for paid parking at GO stations, this being a potential quick win and so on. I wondered if that particular matter could be emphasized again for them.
Certainly it can. And in fact, if you rolled it up in a recommendation, that would be of benefit to us because we'll follow up. We have sent our correspondence to Metrolinx. They did ask for it by Friday, so we sent it to them, but we indicated we'll be following up with a council resolution. And so including it in the council resolution would be helpful.
Okay.
So are you going to do that for another meeting?
No, as I understand, we should do it this evening. And
would you like a minute to draft something?
And it might be helpful to draft something. I wouldn't mind if our staff might draft something quickly for us, but there were a number of other important matters that were brought up by council members relating to things such as grade separations and so forth that I think that council members might appreciate having incorporated as being special points. And so I'm speaking of such things as Kerr Street, for example.
Commissioner, would you like to start drafting? Councillor Duddick.
Thank you, through your worship, and I appreciate the fact Councillor Adams raised that again. Your point was well taken when we had the delegation from Metrolinx that we'll do whatever we can to make their job a little easier for the powers that be or the people who are the decision makers pertaining to the funding. And I'm wondering if there might be some merit for yourself, your worship, to write a letter outlining what transpired this evening and that copying our local MPPs in regards to the urgency for some of this infrastructure that is needed in anticipation of the growth and the growth we already have.
I love writing letters. Thank you for the idea. Perhaps we should include that in the resolution, Commissioner, so that I can quote all of that. So let's leave that item and move right along to new business. And I have a little bit of, let's see, is there any new business? We're looking for notice of motion, emergency, congratulatory, or condolence. I myself have something in memory of Dr. Frank Philbrook. Councillor Lapworth.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two things. First of all, I want to congratulate Her Majesty the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh on their 70th wedding anniversary today. And secondly, also to congratulate all those involved with the Santa Claus parade last Saturday morning, especially town staff for all the work they did in making it a safe place to have the parade, especially the Halton Regional Police and also the EMS.
And Councillor Duddick.
And Councillor Duddick, pardon me.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
Best ever, Councillor Duddick. No one saw the glitch that made you unhappy. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have an announcement of an individual in our ward who is an avid swimmer. They're calling him Superman in a Speedo. Later this month, Madhu Naragja of Oakville will attempt a Canadian first as he travels to a remote location in Chile and endeavors to be the 23rd person to swim across the Strait of Magellan. Even for ships, this passage between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans is difficult because of the unpredictable winds and currents. At the frigid water temperature and waves, and this swim becomes too dangerous for everyone, but the most prepared and most skilled swimmers have a chance. According to the Canadian long-distance swimming icon, Marilyn Bell, my friend Madhu has already proven that he's an extraordinary athlete. He has swam the English Channel, conquered Lake Ontario, and completed the Marathon of Disables, a 6-day ultra-marathon foot race in the Sahara Desert. Madhu and his friends meet regularly at Coronation Park to swim, whatever the weather is. Amy Ross, a swim pal of Madhu, says, "We do it because we love it, and we love the people that come with it." He has a profound love and respect for the water, and when he's not working or training, swimming, or with his family, he devotes many hours working with the Great Lakes Open Water Adventures and Great Lakes Trust, a fund supporting scientific research, artistic expression, and civic engagement for the Great Lakes. If you'd like to support Madhu on his journey, a fundraising page has been set up. Please visit gofundme.com, Madhu Swims. On behalf of the Council, congratulations, and hope he does a successful swim. Thank you.
Outstanding. Councillor Dudek.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have one congratulatory and one condolence. Thank you very much, Councillor Lapworth, for raising that. I too wanted to extend a big thank you to all the participants, volunteers, and our sponsors who, without their generous support, we would not be able to host this annual event of the Santa Claus Parade. This year we added several new sponsors to the team, and I'd like to give a special shout out to Tedescon as a gold sponsor for this year's parade. This event is not possible without many elves behind the scenes making their lists and checking them twice. So thank you to all those who volunteered. As one of our committee members said the day of the parade, seeing the faces of young and old waving and smiling along the route make all the volunteer hours worthwhile. I'd also like to acknowledge a few of my colleagues around this table for their support of this event. Councillor Lischina, Councillor Hutchins, Councillor Adams, Councillor Knoll, whose company provided free films as usual, and of course my ward mate, Councillor Chisholm. This year, we showed to Santa that not even a little moisture could dampen our community's Christmas spirit. It's with deep sadness that I share the recent passing of Tegan Walsh. In July of this year, Tegan injured her leg. When she went to the hospital for treatment, they determined it was a strain MCL, and she'd be fine in a few weeks. However, the swelling in her leg got worse, and walking became extremely painful. After another return to hospital and further testing, Tegan and her family received the news that she had the same type of cancer that Terry Fox suffered from. As a result, they advised she would have to remove her leg and possibly her hip as well. Tegan responded to this diagnosis with her typical upbeat enthusiasm, trying to reassure her family that it was all going to be okay. 10-year-old Tegan participated at this year's Oakville Terry Fox Run. She became this year's poster child for the run, and although in a wheelchair, she and her family attended the run to raise awareness of the fight to end cancer. The staff of the White Oaks Montessori School have created a GoFundMe page to assist her family with the financial burden of fighting this disease. And I encourage those of you who want to support the family during this difficult time to go to the GoFundMe page, help Tegan fight her war on cancer. Tegan will be greatly missed by her twin brother Declan and older brother Aidan, along with her parents Renee and David. While we mourn the loss of this dear sweet girl, I know that Terry Fox now has another warrior to work alongside him.
Thank you, Councillor Dudek, for those moving words. In memory of Dr. Frank Philbrook, I hope we can offer words of condolence to the family and friends who've lost him when he passed away peacefully on Tuesday, October 31st. Dr. Philbrook is remembered here in Oakville as not only our federal member of parliament who served from 1974 to 1979, but as an active and interested participant and fundraiser for many causes for many years afterward. Before entering politics, Dr. Philbrook spent 2 years at a mission hospital in Kashmir and then 4 years as medical officer on a World Bank project in Pakistan. Upon returning to Canada, he became Director of Clinical Research at Ortho Pharmaceuticals Canada Limited before returning to private practice in 1973. As his obituary noted, we celebrate his wonderful life, well-lived and full of adventures. And now, Council, we have the following requests for reports, moved by Councillor Chisholm, seconded by Councillor Dudek, that staff prepare a report providing options for the increased use of 40-kilometer-an-hour zones and/or community safety zones in areas which do or are expected to generate a significant number of pedestrians, and that this report either be presented on the same agenda as the Bill 65 and Speed Enforcement Placement Report, which was requested at the October 23rd, 2017 Council meeting, or combined with the Bill 65 report. I'll call the vote to approve this request for report. All in favor? No one's opposed. It's approved. Moved by Councillor Elgar and seconded by Councillor Lapworth, that staff be directed to prepare a report for Council regarding options for the addition of all-way stop-controlled intersections and the expansion of the 40-kilometer-per-hour speed zone limits on Pine Glen Road. I'll call the vote for approval of this. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. Moved by Councillor Hutchins, seconded by Councillor Giddings, that staff prepare a report providing options to provide for both on-street parking and bicycle lanes on Kingsway Drive in the area of Huntington Trail. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you, everyone. Now, if you will turn to the Metrolinx Regional Transportation Plan Report recommendation. Commissioner, do you want to explain this? So is this to be added to the printed recommendation? We just need a microphone for you.
Would be added to the resolution. I have two separate ones. I'll show you the second one afterwards. The first is that Council requests that Metrolinx consider the following concerns regarding, I guess, the RTP, with the first one being the importance of reducing the reliance on parking at the stations. Would probably help, that wording. And the second is importance of implementing and funding grade separations, particularly advancement of both Kerr and Burloak.
Could you just make stations plural?
Yep.
Thank you. And the Councillor Hutchins?
And chart will also be added to. That's going to be just as.
No, I won't support that. The next point, that would be number 4, number 5. I mean, we can vote on Chartwell, but, you know, it's...
The mayor provide these points these points to Metrolinx in a letter with a CC to the Premier, the local MP, and MPP, and the Minister of Transportation.
Thank you. Now, Commissioner, do you have, does staff have a view of the idea of needing a grade separation at Chartwell before, I mean, you know, where does that sit in our priorities? I mean, seems to me that since it's not in our capital plan, it'd be a little bit extraordinary to be demanding a grade separation that we haven't done the research or the justification for.
Kerr and Burloak are most definitely the priorities from a town perspective.
So, Councillor Hutchins, would you like to move an amendment to add Chartwell?
Yes, please.
Is there a seconder?
The reason I wanted, Can I speak to this?
If you get a second.
I won't do a second? Okay.
Doesn't appear that there's a second. All right, then. Any other questions about the 5 parts of the motion? Councillor Adams.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you having drafted this. On the issue of infrastructure improvements specifically, there's a long list of infrastructure improvements that are required as part of the RTP. Some are, like these ones, grade separations where there would be a component that would be funded typically by the province or the federal government, depending on the nature of what's going on. There are other important infrastructure projects that are out there as well. Many of them may have a provincial element. Many of them may be funded indirectly by the province, and I'm thinking about the Dundas BRT funding that was originally put in. What's staff's take with respect to the issue of advancing funding for other infrastructure that is required? And there's a whole host of infrastructure. Some of it's ours, some of it's the region, some of it is actually the provinces. With respect to the QEW, for example, there's millions and millions of dollars required for that funding. Do we have a position that would be appropriate to put out there with respect to the funding of the major infrastructure?
Councillor, I think we have to keep in mind that Metrolinx's position on the 4 major pieces of the grid that we discussed all await further research on their part, ranging from EAs to business cases. So I'm giving you the same sort of pushback I gave Councillor Hutchins on that part.
Except I'm not advancing any particular one. I'm asking our staff if they have a position on it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have in the staff comments requested that Metrolinx move forward with their implementation plan, which would include their business case and any other research and looking at priority of those projects as quickly as possible. Because it's difficult to look at the RTP and how you can knit all those pieces together without understanding the financial and the implementation plan. So I think in part that covers off what in fact you're asking for, and that is heavily emphasized in our comments. We have 3 main comments, and one of them is that they need to get on with the implementation plan as soon as possible.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I wondered if there was a specific item. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner, what's your feeling about adding to this one a the importance of making forecasts of the impact on the local modal split of each piece of the plan, or some words to such effect? The question I asked them.
Actually, it would be a good idea to add something like that in. I know the RTP plan is looking at a lot more metrics in order to measure their success. Modal split is certainly a metric they should be measuring and projecting into any improvement they make. So it could, I would support adding it in.
Well, we'd be happy to watch you do it.
Okay. How about I move it over here first?
But you have such neat handwriting. It was kind of fun watching you write it.
Okay, the handwriting is not nearly as good as before, but that Metrolinx ensure that modal splits and other metrics are specifically considered in planning infrastructure improvements.
You might, Jane, want to work are specifically forecasted in the planning and tracked in terms of final outcomes, so that you forecast it and then you track it.
And the local angle would be good to include, I think.
The local modal splits,
Yep.
forecasted and tracked in planning infrastructure improvements.
All right, thank you very much. We need a mover and seconder. My goodness, we have a lot. Councillor Lischina. Oh, I beg your pardon. Oh, we do. We have Mark Grant and we have
Well, given the amount of work that Councillor Adams has done on this, I'd be happy if he would like to move it.
Very well. The minutes will show Councillor Adams, and it's a Ward 6 show, I guess. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Thank you, everybody. I think all we need now is mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws. Mr. Chisholm, Councillor Chisholm. On what? Oh, yeah.
When I view all these reports coming forward, they seem to arbitrarily move dates with respect to,
Must be getting tired. In the coming quarters, I asked for a report almost 2 years ago, and it seems to keep moving. The dates keep moving. Is there a policy or with respect to these movements on these reports that we're not aware of? If they are being moved or moved up, I'd love to know and know when these are happening.
So, yes, there is. There's a bylaw, in fact, that provides for that. And the report that you get at every council meeting is your notice of the movement, which allows you to bring it up and ask your colleagues for.
All right. So, as a bylaw, I have the opportunity to request the report.
No, the bylaw allows staff to slip things when necessity requires, and the report allows council to renew or sharpen the request. So it's a loop.
All right. So, just let it go. Thank you.
Okay. I'll be glad to work with you offline on that. Did I get a mover and seconder for the bylaws? You didn't. Still polling. Councillor O'Meara, thank you. Councillor Hutchins, are you seconding? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and the bylaws are adopted. That ends our agenda. It's been terrific working with you, and we are adjourned.